Thank you everyone for joining our workshop series of workshop. I think this is number 18. We've been talking about quite a few different topics. I am excited to be joined today by Andrew Hall, who's the principal product owner of at UiPath. He is responsible for the Studio X product. You've been hearing us go back and forth on useless topics. Say hi to Andrew.
Hey folks, I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you very much. So we'll dive straight into it. You know, the citizen developer moniker has been around for quite a while. Every time there's a low code platform, or I heard that back in way ago when we were doing test automation to say, hey, your business users are going to start developing automation. So that has been around for quite a while, but I think it is important as these low code platforms are graduating and are coming to the point where they're becoming easier for business users to use. The how to support the citizen developer, as well as being able to set the guidelines on some governance. It's a conversation that comes up quite often, both Andrew and myself, as we speak to our customers. So we thought it warranted a conversation here. Today, what we're going to talk about is a citizen developer, how to support them, and what features are available within the UiPath product to enable that. Because I mean, to be very honest, there aren't too many products as it relates to RPA that allow this capability. So before I get into the topic at hand, I just want to clarify some jargon we're going to use today, right? For those who are not familiar with RPA and the paradigm itself, we might mention the words attended robots and unattended robots. An attended robot is a automation that runs on a user's desktop that they use for their everyday work, as opposed to an unattended automation, which generally runs in a data center on a virtual machine somewhere. We will also use the words robots, automations, and processes. Just for clarification's sake, people have different definitions around, but when we refer to a robot, we refer to an agent that is sitting on a machine and has the capability to run a predefined set of tasks, which we call processes or automations. So I just wanted to clarify that, just so as we're talking about it, sometimes we take it for granted, but just wanted to make sure that everyone understands what we mean when we say those words. So wanted to set the stage a little bit around citizen developer, what that means, and what we're going to talk about today, just so that everyone has the context of what we're talking about. Traditionally, RPA has been around for a while now. People have established center of excellences. People have established programs around what we see a lot of unattended automations. Of course, there are obviously attended automations out there as well, but the general workflow for the traditional RPA development is the business analyst or the business user, or sometimes called the process analyst, is knowledgeable about the process, identifies the process, they define it for the RPA developer, the RPA developer creates that workflow, throws it back to the process analyst or the business analyst for review. And the RPA admins are the ones who generally run the workflow. They schedule the robots in the orchestrator and set up the business analyst or the business user to use the attended or unattended robot. But in this case, we're talking about robots that are running on users' desktops. So they set this up so the business user is able to run the robot. Another way to look at this is RPA developers who are hired and whose primary function they get paid to develop automations are the ones who build the attended or unattended automations to be run by others. And they have some programming skills. They understand variables, parameters, control flows, exception handling, so on and so forth. And they push these automations to what we call here the automation users, which are the business users, who run these automations built by others who are business experts, understand the process flows. What we have seen is in that community, you have a varying degree of programming aptitude. And as they are getting more familiar with these low code platforms, there's a sense that, hey, listen, maybe some business users who have that programming aptitude might be able to become developers. So what we're talking about today is if you have business users who have a technical bent to them, they know they have the skills that I mentioned for the RPA developers, they might graduate to become a RPA developer, and that's not what we're talking about today. If they switch their roles from being a person who processes invoices or a salesperson who does sales for a living to a RPA developer, there's tons of resources out there who can tell you about how to do governance training, all sorts of things for RPA developers. What we're talking about here is the citizen developer. A citizen developer is a developer for the context of this conversation, is a developer who develops attended automations either for themselves or for their immediate team use, while they also may use RPA developer developed automations. These users have process knowledge. Generally speaking, they have Excel proficiency, which leads to a lot of macro programming type skills, and obviously logical thinking of how to be able to uh, carve out tasks within a process. So I just wanted to give that context for everyone to be clear on what we're talking about here when we mean the citizen developer. Anything to add there, Andrew?
No, I think that was a fantastic summary. I think it's just maybe worth reinforcing that what we mean by citizen developer here is someone who is creating automations for themselves to get their job done, but they do not consider it a part of their job to produce automations.
Perfect. That's exactly that. That's exactly right. And in order to enable this, I'll hand this over to Andrew to talk about Enter Studio X, right? It's a product by UiPath that enables these citizen developers, and the next couple of slides I'll ask Andrew to talk about that a little bit.
Perfect.
Oops. Give you control there, Andrew.
All right, yeah. So while Ahmed's giving me control, just so I can drive the slides and not ask him to click every time, I will. All right, perfect, no problem. So I think one of the things when we started out around citizen development at UiPath, we never want to be technology driven. We want to be solution driven from a customer perspective. Meaning it's a big thing to go build a different product, and that really should be a last resort, not the first place to start. And so we were working with some analysts and some researchers to figure out what does automation look like today with what we have, which had UiPath Studio at the time and the COE, the traditional top-down model that Ahmed just kind of talked about, where you have people that identify the things, they work with RPA developers to develop it. And what we realized in talking to customers is this is finding, and it makes sense, the highest ROI opportunities in the organization. Meaning that when you start, you say, I have a very small team of trained RPA developers who are going to go produce automation. What is the best use of those developers? And you're going to typically identify things that are very, very critical to the business. And that's where you're going to put your effort, and that's where you're going to invest your trained resources. And so you're automating things that have a very high ROI from an organizational perspective. But in terms of the automation opportunity within the company, you're only identifying about 3 to 7% of the total automation opportunities within the company. And the problem that comes up on the very long tail here in this orange thing is typically these are opportunities for people to automate things for themselves, or as Ahmed said, their immediate team. But the organizational ROI isn't that high when you measure, well, can I justify dedicating 3 RPA developers to building this project and then running it in a production environment, maintaining it, using server resources, those types of things. But what we found is that when people can use automation to help themselves with their own jobs in the company, not only does it improve their efficiency, but it actually improves employee satisfaction, which leads to better employee retention. One of the things that got me excited about coming to UiPath was in my previous role, I ran a team of product managers, and we were looking to do some experiments. We had some systems that let us kind of connect product telemetry to customer emails, and it was all behind, nice systems, so we couldn't actually see the customers, but we can enter a query and we can say, email 250 customers that meet this criteria. But in order to do that, it was a very manual and repetitive. So we had some things where we're like, okay, let's go every day for 2 weeks, email everybody that yesterday in the product did this for the first time. And let's send them some resources and say, hey, we noticed you did this, let's help you get started and see if that improves any of the metrics that we were tracking. And I had some pretty grumpy PMs who thought it was pretty dumb that every day at 10 a.m. they had to go copy and paste a bunch of stuff, click, they had to have the email template and they had to have the query. But the way the system was set up, it was not possible to do it any other way than driving it through the UI, or we had to get IT involved, and IT was never going to help us automate something for a 2-week experiment. So the goal of Ahmed, yep, thank you. Says I have control, but it's not actually going through. Is to let people identify their own tasks and automate based on their individual needs. And from an organizational perspective, this is actually going to let you pick up a much higher percentage of automation opportunities. But you're not going to be able to do that with the RPA developer model. You're going to have to let people create their own automations. And so as we started looking at this, we actually realized we needed to introduce another product tailored at this particular customer set in Studio X. So the first question that comes up, if we can go to the next slide, is, why wasn't UiPath Studio what we had going to meet that need and satisfy that? And, I like to say, paraphrase Spider-Man here, but with great complexity comes great power. And UiPath Studio is an enterprise level software development tool that is designed to let you build any automation that you need to power your business. It's designed for very complex things. So you can build what we call long-running workflows, where the idea of you could have an automation that runs over the course of months and helps onboard employees. There's a lot of software concepts here. There's strong typing, so it's built on top of .NET, right? Enterprise hardened, battle tested, but we're asking people to understand things like dictionaries and data tables and converting from integers to strings and all that type of stuff. There's queues, right? So when information comes in, we're going to store that in a queue on the server. There's sequences and flowcharts and state machines. There's exception handling, all these things that you need to build high quality enterprise software that's going to run on a server somewhere where you don't have somebody monitoring it and using it. The problem is that takes quite a bit of software training. You're going to need to invest months to really train somebody and get them to the place where they can develop software. And we talked to a lot of people as we were developing and coming up with Studio X who, we talked to nurses, for example, who said, yeah, I have jobs that I want to automate. I want to do less paperwork. I want to do, less form filling in my role. But, if it takes me more than a couple hours to do this, it's not worth my time. Like, nobody's rewarding me for building automations. They're rewarding me for doing my job. So the ability to develop an automation, it has to work within their existing workflow. They can't take hours or they can't take days and weeks out to go learn how to build automation so they can build automations. So this is where we came up with the idea of Studio X. And we said, all right, in order to appeal to this particular customer set, we really need to develop a new product that's aimed at this particular customer set. And what we're going to do is we're going to say it doesn't do everything, but what it does, it makes simple to do. And we have run customers through, hundreds of customers through studies. We went and found people that had no automation experience but fit our profile, and we put them in front of the product and we said, let's do this. And so we came up with, it's all about tasks. So the idea of Studio X, it's single file only. You don't have state machines. You don't have exception handling. We made it very scenario focused. So if you look in the screenshot in the right side, right, it's all about, I want to use an application or a web browser. I want to use an Excel file. I want to use my Outlook account. I want to use Word file. I want to add a picture to a Word file, right? So we made it very scenario focused. We did this by creating a subset of activities. we removed any concept of complex types. So we have this concept of save for later, which if you've ever programmed, you'll realize is, of course, has to be a variable under the covers. But that's the screenshot in the lower right, where when a user gets something back, so maybe you want to retrieve some data from a web page, you just say save for later. And if you use the data scraping activity, we're going to store that as a table under the covers. But we're not asking the user. We're just saying, what do you want to call it? If you're getting just a string, it might be a string. If you're getting a number, it might be a number. But the user just said, give it a name. And it's not even following normal variable naming rules. If you've ever programmed the screenshot, you'll see it says text space from space open quote name close quote. You can't have spaces in variable names. You can't have quotation marks in real variable names. But we've abstracted all of that away from the user, and they can focus on just building automations to automate their tasks. There's none of the sort of normal rules of programming that apply.
Perfect. So with that, and that gets deployed out to a wide user base, right? Generally speaking, hundreds of users, and just like you did, you had other productivity tools. This Studio X gets deployed to hundreds and thousands of users, and imagine 20 minutes saved from 1,000 users days, more than pays for the program, and the productivity gain that the enterprise gets from that is so huge. But with that, every time we have this conversation, the IT folks who've been around for a little bit, and just for good reason, say, oh no, we tried that with Excel and Access, and look what it got us. 5 years later, we had this file that was being developed by someone, and I don't have any clue as to who developed it, what did they do with it, how it is run, how it is used, how many times it is used, and now I'm being asked to maintain and support this thing that I had no visibility into while it was being done and developed. So I think that is one of a big concern of the shadow IT type. I have an organization that's developing stuff that is IT-ish, but I have no control over it. I think the Studio X and the citizen developer paradigm through RPA addresses very nicely that concern, right? So there's a central governance from what's called the orchestrator, which is the manager for the robots, that allows you to look into what is being developed, how it is being used, how it is being initiated and kicked off. And every single task that happens within every single step that happens through that automation is actually audited. So you have, as a governance body, you have full visibility into what is happening. I think that was one of the biggest concerns that I come from a capital markets background, and our users just would not give up Excel and their macros, and they loved it. And it saved us in IT a lot of time from having to address a lot of the things that they were asking for. We would have had to write ETL jobs and then kick off 4, 6 1-year projects to do things that they said that didn't have the full ROI if we had kicked off that kind of project. But the side effect of that was obviously I had an automation that I didn't know what to do, and eventually I knew that somebody would throw it in my lap to say support it. But I think this is great, where you have a product which gives the users that flexibility to do the work, but gives you the visibility from a governance perspective to allow you to see who has it, how are they using it, and what are they doing with it. So all executions are logged, and then you have controlled provisioning. So you can provision very easily levels of provisioning in terms of, I would like this user to be able to do this or not. So there's a centrally controlled and provisioned environment. From your conversations, Andrew, with your customers, anything else that you address here?
No, I think this is well, I think it's a subset of what you're talking about. So I think you hit on all the major themes exactly. And I had a conversation with a customer yesterday who asked exactly this question. Our number one concern is shadow IT. How do we know when somebody develops something, and how do we have visibility into it? We don't want them leaving their job and all of a sudden something gets dropped in our lap that their replacement can't even do the job because they'd created some automation that we didn't even know existed and we didn't know was part of the job. And so Ahmed's spot on that, one of the questions is not only who is developing stuff, but what are they developing? And because of assuming you issue your licenses through Orchestrator, users can't execute or run any of these things or develop them offline, and then every action they take at a very high level. So for example, if you see the screenshots on Ahmed's slide here, it's telling you, which process name, who developed it. And so you can very easily build dashboards and reports to say, I want to know who's building these things. I want to know what they're running. And it gives you the opportunity to, from an IT perspective, do the follow-up and say, okay, these need to be stored in this central location. And you can even automate that follow-up if you want.
And the interesting thing is that under the covers, you have a traditional RPA automation, which if somebody said, hey, look, we did this, Joe from accounting has written this beautiful thing, or Joe from sales has written this beautiful thing, and would like to make this, harden it, and actually have it deployed to other users as well and use it at scale. You can take that automation and use your traditional RPA developers to actually harden it, get visibility into what they did, and make this into your traditional professionally developed RPA automation. So I think that's another very big plus point that you're able to bring that back in. The other thing that we're asked is, what about security and compliance, right? So I think it is a valid question, right? So the other related question is replication of error at scale. That we again, it's in the realm of the citizen developer. That's not as big an issue because these are all attended automations that are running with the users in front of them. And they can see what's happening, and if it's being done incorrectly, they know right off the bat that it's being done incorrectly. So the replication of error at scale that is sort of a concern in unattended automations isn't that big a concern here. However, there are obviously those concerns of, how do we address the security and compliance things? And I think, given that the market is so new and the products are so new, that UiPath's leading the charge in addressing those concerns, I'll let Andrew talk a little bit about some of the security and compliance features built into Studio X, so that everybody knows what features are there, and then they can address the security and compliance concerns.
Yeah, thanks, Ahmed. So, when talking to customers, we rolled out our first preview of Studio X last fall. And pretty consistently, the number one question was, what about security and compliance? What about security and compliance? What about governance? And so what we've developed in Studio X was very much based on what we heard from our customers talking about, was a couple themes emerged. I want to be able to control the websites and applications that people can actually automate against. We're an enterprise. Some particular sites have terms of service that say you can't run a bot against them. We don't want to open ourselves up to a lawsuit if they find out we did it. So we have rules built in. So what we developed is we developed the ability to where you can define a policy. You push this to users' machines. The policy can exist remote. It's set by simply setting a registry key on the machine, which can be either done via installation script or a Windows group policy. And then you can control all sorts of things about how the IDE behaves. I don't have time to cover them all, but the big ones based on the themes that we heard were, there's rules in there that you can say, you may not. So there's a prohibited list of websites and applications. So if you want to just, mark a couple as prohibited, you can do that. The alternative is you can get really restrictive and you can say only allowed. There's an only allowed list. You can say you're only allowed to work with stuff on our internal intranet subdomain or something like that. It's your choice. The other big thing that we heard pretty consistently from organizations was the concern about citizen developers not knowing what they're doing and pulling in new packages, libraries, or skills, as they're called here, from a public feed. So we're built on top of NuGet, and we have our own marketplace for UiPath. We review those, but depending on organizational concerns, sometimes some of the activities that we have, or skills as they're called here, may work in a way that they're a perfectly fine activity, but they are not in compliance with your particular IT standards. So for example, we have some customers that work in the financial industry, and they have a policy that nothing can leave their firewall. Well, we have some really cool skills that use ML, but in order to do that processing power, it actually sends data to a UiPath server in the cloud, processes it, and sends it back. So they want to prohibit those activities. And so the policy lets you put controls in place where you can say, you know what, I'm going to control the feeds. We're going to have an internal IT controlled feed. You can only get libraries or skills from this feed. And the other thing you can then do is you actually have the ability to say these packages are not allowed, or these particular sets of activities are not allowed. So if, for example, you wanted to restrict a certain subset of activities, but other activities in that particular library would be needed. And then if you have needs beyond that, there's the ability to write your own custom internal rules if you have particular best practices or additional rules you want to enforce that are not things that we at UiPath were able to anticipate, or if they're not things that are common amongst other customers. And I think Ahmed already talked about Orchestrator. Orchestrator gives all sorts of great security features, meaning that you can put users into different buckets and they can have access to different resources. For example, you can store credentials or other asset information in Orchestrator. And that can be done on a per user basis or by user group. So if everybody has like a shared password, you don't want necessarily everybody storing that somewhere and working it. You just say, you have the asset, you load it from Orchestrator, IT takes care of populating that data. And then of course, as Ahmed was showing in the previous slide, all that information, everything those users are doing is always being logged into the logs.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. That's perfect timing as well. We're exactly at 2:28. We'll open the floor up to some questions. If you have any questions, you can just go to the chat window. Let me actually share that so you can see where we can go. Let me share my screen, and you should be able to see. If you go into Teams, you can go to this show conversation window and type in your questions, and we'll be able to see them. All right, Megan, what do we got coming in?
All right, there's a couple to start with. The first one, what's the best way to enable and train my citizen developers?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think the paradigm itself is fairly new. We've been working very closely with UiPath in running these sessions with a very focused group of users, showing them the features of the product. We run these things called botathons that are very helpful in making sure that people understand what the tool that they have at their hands. It's just a little bit of a training, and then after that, we've seen that people take off on it. Anything in other than that, Andrew, you may have in terms of how to enable the users?
I might just unpack what you said, because I think you hit on all the big themes. What we've been generally recommending to people and how to do it is you ask for a group of volunteers so you want the most passionate, most interested people, run a small pilot where you give them some dedicated time. For example, UiPath, we have a free academy with a 5-hour training to run through the Studio X stuff. Run them through, run a little pilot, give them, a chunk of time, could be 2 days or something, to do a botathon or hackathon. Take the training, try some things, have a conversation with them about what works, where they see it working well in the organization. I think that'll give you a really good idea about what groups might be the first one to try to pilot this with, but also now that you've built up that dedicated group of people who are interested and have a little experience, they help you scale by being able to answer questions and help other people.
Perfect. Any others? I know we're almost up a minute over our time.
Yes, there's one more. Do you expect citizen developers to utilize some sort of code management version control tool?
Good question. Very good question. So there's a level of version control that's already built into the product through Orchestrator. You have versions of packages and things like that will automatically do that. Andrew, you have some more thoughts on that. Our initial
I can
thought is,
share our long-term plans.
Yeah.
We have found that source control, as it typically works through traditional software development tools, which is available in the studio, the developer version, whether that be Git or TFS or SVN, tends to be pretty advanced for the citizen developer. We do have plans to bring in what we make it feel more like working with a document in Office SharePoint, where you just say, where do you want to save this? And we do some sort of automatic versioning, just like Word or OneNote or PowerPoint, how they handle that. But in the short term, I think so eventually, yes. In the short term, what we would generally recommend is that IT, using those logs, just have a general guidance of asking people to save their projects in a place that IT has access to.
And again, this is very similar to, I mean, I used to have users have their personal macros and all that. The good thing is that you have access to that. The package that's up on the orchestrator that runs this thing is easily unpackable, and you have all that code. It's not like the code goes away if the person goes away, right? So you have access to all of that stuff. So that's a good part in it. All right, that's good. I don't see any more new questions coming in. You have my email address here, as well as Andrew's email address. We really appreciate you joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Ahmed. It was fun.
Take care.